My name's Alex, and I've been a freelance game developer for years. It's not glamorous work, but it's what I'm good at. Most of my projects were forgettable. Bug fixes, optimizing menus, but this one was mine, my first full game. I called it Nightfall, a survival horror game. The idea was simple. Players were lost in a dark forest, hunted by an unseen presence. I wanted it to feel claustrophobic, oppressive, but I never expected those feelings to spill into my real life. I worked out of a tiny studio apartment in Austin. The space was cramped, a desk with dual monitors, a mattress in the corner, and stacks of empty coffee cups. The glow of my screen was the only light most nights. I didn't mind the isolation. Hell, I thought I thrived on it. But as the deadline approached, something shifted. It started with the sound files. One night I was fine-tuning the ambient wind I'd recorded for the forest. Everything sounded normal, soft gusts, distant branches creaking. But then I noticed something faint, like static. I zoomed in on the audio waveform, amplifying it. Beneath the wind there was something, a faint rhythmic tapping, almost like footsteps. I dismissed it as a corrupted file and re-recorded the track. But the next time I played the game, the tapping was back, louder, more distinct. It wasn't random, it was timed to match the character's movements. I started feeling paranoid, like the game was messing with me. I couldn't focus, constantly glancing over my shoulder. My apartment felt too quiet, the air too still, the kind of stillness that makes your skin crawl. A week later, while combing through the code, I spotted something strange, a function I didn't recognize. It was buried in the scripts that controlled the forest's atmosphere. The comment beside it said, "Keep quiet." My chest tightened. I was confused. How could this be? I was the only one working on this project. No one else had access to the files. I deleted the function, but the same comment reappeared the next day. From then on, Nightfall became unpredictable. During tests, objects I hadn't placed would appear. Rocks stacked like markers, footprints leading nowhere. Sometimes the environment would glitch and reset, leaving the player character surrounded by endless black. But the worst was the menu screen. One night, after hours of tweaking lighting effects, I booted up the game to check my progress. The main menu looked normal at first. Then, the text started disappearing. One by one, the options faded until only exit remained. I stared at the screen, frozen. My mouse wasn't moving, but the cursor hovered over the button on its own. Then the screen flickered, and a single line of text appeared. "You're not alone." I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the unease. "Some prank," I muttered, but the tension in my chest wouldn't go away. My apartment felt too quiet, like the silence was pressing in. I decided to take a break, shutting everything down for the night. But when I turned off the lights, I noticed something strange. My monitor, a high-end display, emitted a faint glow even though it was unplugged. And that's when I heard it, a faint rustling sound coming from behind me. I froze, every hair on my body standing on end. Slowly I turned my head. My apartment was empty, but my desk chair was moving, spinning slightly like someone had just stood up from it. My breathing quickened. "It's just me," I whispered. "I'm just tired." I locked my bedroom door that night for the first time ever. The next day I swore to finish Nightfall and be done with it. I told myself the paranoia was all in my head. But when I booted up the project, the game launched on its own. It opened to a level I hadn't made. The screen showed a crude, first-person view of a room. My room. I sat there staring in disbelief. The details were identical. The placement of my desk, the coffee stains on the table, even the crack in the wall near the window. It was a perfect recreation of my apartment. My heart pounded as the character's view began to move, footsteps echoing in my headphones. The player walked toward the desk, toward the screen, towards me. I ripped the headphones off and slammed my laptop shut. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't think straight. I yanked the power cord from the wall, but the screen stayed on, the footsteps growing louder. Then they stopped. The screen went black, and a final message appeared in white text. "Check the closet." I didn't move. My entire body was frozen with fear. Slowly, I glanced at the closet door. It was closed, just like always, but now there was a shadow at the bottom, a sliver of darkness breaking the light spilling from my desk lamp. I grabbed my phone and bolted out of the apartment, the door rattling on its hinges as I slammed it shut behind me. My breath came in ragged gasps. my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might drown out the silence I'd left inside. That was the last time I touched Nightfall. The files still exist, buried on an old hard drive somewhere, like a curse I can't bring myself to break. I've thought about deleting them, but the thought of opening that folder again makes my stomach twist. Hells. I can't even bring myself to go back to that apartment. I moved across town and started freelancing again, but I can't escape the memories. Sometimes, late at night, I'll hear faint footsteps outside my door or feel a shift in the air behind me. I tell myself it's just paranoia, but every now and then I wake up to find my desk chair slightly turned, like someone's been sitting there watching me work. I've always loved playing obscure indie games, especially ones made by local developers. There's a certain charm in seeing what someone can create with limited resources and a lot of passion. That's why I was immediately intrigued when I saw a post on a gaming forum about a new mystery thriller game called Hollow Trails. The developer, someone using the name Northwood, claimed the game was inspired by real events that happened in a small town in the Midwest. As someone who grew up in a quiet, forgotten town myself, I couldn't resist downloading it. It was a pixel art game with a top-down view, the kind where you explored a small, open-world map, piecing together clues to solve a central mystery. The game's description was vague, hinting only that you were trying to uncover what happened to a missing child. That night I loaded it up, expecting a simple, eerie adventure. What I found was something far darker. The game started innocently enough. My character was a reporter who had returned to their hometown to investigate the disappearance of a 10-year-old boy named Elliot. The map was small, a handful of houses, a diner, a park, and an abandoned barn on the outskirts of town. There were no markers or objectives, just hints to explore and talk to the townsfolk. The dialogue was cryptic, each NPC saying something that hinted at unease. We don't talk about that night. Some things are better left buried. Have you checked the woods yet? The music was soft, almost melancholic, but there was an edge to it, a faint, dissonant hum that made my skin crawl the longer I played. Then I noticed something odd. The NPCs weren't static like in most games. They moved around the map, sometimes disappearing completely, only to show up in different locations. One character, a man in a grey hat, seemed to be following me. The game's tension grew as I uncovered more clues. The park's sandbox had a toy truck half buried in the dirt, and the barn contained a locked door with scratch marks near the handle. But the most unsettling part was the woods. The deeper I ventured into the trees, the more distorted the music became. At one point, I found a trail of footprints that led to a hidden clearing. In the center was a single pixelated object, a backpack. When I interacted with it, the screen flashed white, and a new clue appeared in my inventory. Elliot's backpack stained with dirt. As I returned to town, I noticed the man in the grey hat again. This time he wasn't just following me, he was standing near the barn staring at my character. I tried to approach him, but as soon as I got close, he disappeared. I couldn't stop playing. The game had a hold on me, the way it kept dropping hints that something terrible had happened here. I started piecing together the clues. Elliot's disappearance, the strange behaviour of the townsfolk, the locked barn and the man in the grey hat. Then I stumbled across something I hadn't expected. In the game's diner, there was a bulletin board with a collection of missing person posters. Most of them were generic, but one stood out. It had a picture of Elliot, along with a grainy image of a man with a blurred face. Below it were the words, "Last seen near the woods." I stared at the screen, unease creeping in. The man's outline was familiar. He looked just like the NPC in the grey hat. The game's atmosphere became darker after that. The townsfolk began saying stranger things like, "You shouldn't be digging where you don't belong. You think you're the first to ask questions." The turning point came when I unlocked the barn. It required finding a hidden key buried in the park's sandbox, a frustrating puzzle that felt too deliberate. When I opened the barn door, the screen went black for several seconds before fading in to show the interior. The room was empty except for a table in the centre. On the table was a single item, a photograph. When I interacted with it, the screen flashed again, and the photo appeared in my inventory. The image was grainy and pixelated, but I could make out two figures, a boy and a man. The boy was Elliot, and the man was wearing a grey hat. Suddenly the music stopped, and a new message appeared on the screen. "He's still here." Then the game froze. I stared at my monitor, unsure of what to do. After a few moments, I heard a soft chime, an email notification. My stomach twisted as I opened my inbox. The email was from Northwood. It contained no text, just an attachment, a real version of the photograph I had just seen in the game. I didn't sleep that night. The photo felt too real, the boy too familiar. I started digging online, looking up news articles about missing children. After hours of searching, I found it, an article from a small-town newspaper about a boy named Elliot who had vanished 10 years ago. The article included details eerily similar to the game: the abandoned barn, the woods, and the man last seen with Elliot. A drifter described as wearing a grey hat. I sent everything I had, screenshots, emails, even the game files, to the local police. They seemed skeptical but promised to investigate. A week later, I got a call. They thanked me, saying the information had led them to reopen the case. The barn and surrounding woods were being searched again. That night, I got another email. It wasn't from the police. The subject line read, "Stay out of this." The body of the email contained only 2 words, "I see you." 2 days later, I saw the news. It was all over the media. Breakthrough in 10-year-old missing child case. The police had located a man matching the description of the one in the game. He was living alone in an old house near the woods, not far from the barn in the game. The articles didn't go into much detail, but the report said they found evidence linking him to multiple disappearances over the years. But it was worse than that. A detective involved in the case reached out to me. He told me the team was digging through the house, looking for clues, when they found something chilling: a basement. Inside, the walls were covered with drawings, crude, childlike sketches of boys and girls, all with wide, terrified eyes. In the corner of the room was an ancient computer. It was still on, displaying a single screen. The game, Hollow Trails. The detective explained that the man, the suspect, had been using the game as a trap. Each copy was tailored to the player, mining data from their systems, learning about their hometowns, their fears, their lives. The clues in the game weren't fictional. They were carefully planted, based on real details from local unsolved cases. "You were lucky," the detective said. "Whoever this guy was, he wasn't just luring players into his game. He was using it to find new targets." My skin crawled. I asked if they found Elliot. The detective paused before answering. "Not alive," he said quietly. The last thing they found in the basement was a file, encrypted but partially recovered. It was a list of names and mine was on it. Beta testing was a hobby that paid surprisingly well. Developers sent me early builds of their games. I played through them, reported bugs, and earned quick cash. It was an easy way to earn some cash while feeding my addiction to games. I never thought it could be anything more than that. Certainly not something dangerous. But Echo Ridge changed that. Echo Ridge was an indie multiplayer horror experience. The email from the developer promised an immersive atmosphere and cutting-edge mechanics, but the instructions that came with it were oddly specific. Play alone at night with headphones for the best results. I followed the instructions without question. It wasn't unusual for horror games to push for full immersion. That night, I dimmed the lights in my one-bedroom apartment, grabbed my headphones, and launched the game. The premise was simple. You explored a maze of tunnels, hearing the footsteps of other players nearby, but never seeing them. The goal was to escape without being caught by some unseen presence. At first, I was impressed. The tunnels were eerily quiet, and the sound design, dripping water, distant echoes, was immersive. I could hear footsteps all around me, moving in tandem with mine. It was unsettling but effective. But then small details began to feel off. The footsteps didn't behave like those of other players. I stood still in a shadowy corridor to test them, listening closely. At first, the sound faded, like whoever it was had walked away. But then the footsteps returned, slow and deliberate, matching the rhythm of my breathing. I whipped the camera around, expecting to see something or someone. But the tunnel was empty. A cold knot of unease formed in my stomach. I paused the game and checked the player list. It showed only one active user, me. I told myself it was just an atmospheric feature. Maybe the game simulated other players to enhance the horror. But when I returned to the game, things got stranger. The tunnel system had subtly changed. The walls seemed closer, the lighting dimmer. As I moved forward, the sound of breathing started. Not my own, but something deep, raspy and faintly human. The breathing grew louder as I turned a corner. My palms were slick with sweat. and the keys felt slippery under my fingertips. The game was doing its job. I felt on edge, but this was too real. The tunnel ahead split into two paths. I chose the left, but as I moved, I heard a metallic clang behind me. I froze. The clang wasn't part of the game's eerie ambient sounds. It was sharp, distinct, and far too close. I spun the camera around, but the tunnel was empty. My heart pounded as I scanned the dark, pixelated corridor. I leaned back in my chair, suddenly hyper-aware of the silence in my apartment. I thought I heard something outside my headphones. A faint creak, like weight shifting on the floorboards. I whipped the headphones off and listened. Nothing. Just the muffled hum of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of my monitor. I laughed nervously, shaking my head. "You're losing it," I muttered. But the relief didn't last. When I put the headphones back on, my character was no longer in the tunnels. The screen showed a dimly lit room. My stomach dropped as I realized it wasn't part of the game's environment. It was my apartment. The details were pixelated but unmistakable. The desk, the chair, the faint coffee ring on the table, it was all there. I sat perfectly still, my breath shallow, as the camera in the game panned across the room. It was slow, deliberate, like someone holding a real camera and scanning the space. When it stopped, it focused on my chair, me. For a moment, I thought it was some elaborate, immersive feature, a clever way to make the game feel personal. But then the chat box appeared. "Nice place you've got here." I stared at the screen, my heart racing. My fingers trembled as I typed back. "Who is this?" The reply came instantly. "Turn around." I froze. Every nerve in my body screamed at me not to move, but the pressure was unbearable. Slowly, I turned my head. The room was empty. Forcing a laugh, I said, "Good one," I muttered, trying to brush it off as a joke or clever programming. But when I looked back at the screen, the game had changed again. The camera view was now positioned high, looking down at my desk. It was a live feed. A sinking dread settled in my chest as I realized what I was looking at. It wasn't my monitor's webcam. The angle was all wrong. It was coming from above. I glanced up, my heart pounding, and that's when I saw it. A tiny black device in the corner of the ceiling. A blinking lens. My throat tightened and my vision blurred. I hadn't installed a camera. My mind raced. How long had it been there? Who had put it there? The screen flickered and new text appeared. "You should really lock your doors." As if on cue, I heard a faint scraping noise from the hallway. Slow, deliberate, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. I stopped, my breath hitching, shallow and uneven. The sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, crept closer, each thud pounding heavier, louder, as if echoing through my chest. And then silence. It stopped, right outside my apartment door. I wasn't thinking anymore. I grabbed my phone, my keys, and bolted for the door, leaving the game running on the monitor. I ran barefoot down the street, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't stop until I reached the gas station 2 blocks away, its fluorescent lights like a beacon of safety. I called the police from there, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold the phone. When they arrived, they found my apartment empty. The camera was gone, the game had crashed, and there was no sign of forced entry. The officer took my statement, but it felt like they didn't believe me. Honestly, I wasn't sure I believed myself. The next day, I deleted every file related to Echo Ridge, but I couldn't stop thinking about the developer, the person who had sent me the game. They had access to my computer, my camera, my home. A week later, I received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a USB drive. I threw it in the trash and moved out of that apartment the same day. But no matter where I go, I can't shake the feeling that I'm still being watched. I've always been a sucker for niche indie games. Late one night, while scrolling through a list of obscure free downloads on a forum, I came across a game called Silent Home. The description was brief, a narrative exploration game about family, secrets, and survival. What stood out to me, though, was the lack of a developer name. No credits, no reviews, just a plain download link. It felt like a forgotten project, one of those raw, deeply personal games someone made and abandoned. I downloaded it curious about what it might reveal. I had no idea how much darker things were about to get. The game started with my character standing in a pixelated house. The art was simple but effective. Dim lighting, grey walls, and furniture that looked worn and old. A text box popped up as I moved. They said this was my home, but it doesn't feel like one. The house was divided into rooms I could explore, each filled with small objects: a cracked mirror, a child's drawing, a locked diary. Every time I interacted with something, a short message would appear. At first, the messages were subtle, like, "Mom said I could never go outside," or, "He said he'd take care of me after they were gone." But as I delved deeper, the tone became more ominous. Why did they have to scream so much? And he said it was better this way. The whispers of unease turned into an oppressive weight. I couldn't shake the feeling that this game wasn't just a story, it was a message. The most unsettling part was how the game subtly mirrored real life. There was no music, just the muffled sound of footsteps, a faint clock ticking, and occasional static bursts. The atmosphere was stifling, like the house itself was suffocating me. One room in the game caught my attention. A small, locked door at the end of a hallway. Interacting with it brought up a line of text. "It's where they keep the truth." I needed a key, which I eventually found in the kitchen, tucked into a jar labelled "Promises." The door creaked open to reveal a dark room with a single chair and an empty dinner plate on the table. The text that appeared hit me like a punch to the gut. He said if I was good, they wouldn't scream anymore. At this point, I wasn't sure if I could keep playing, but I couldn't stop. The game felt alive, like it was pleading with me to uncover something. Eventually, I found an item in the game that changed everything: a cracked laptop. Interacting with it brought up a wall of text, much longer than anything else I'd seen so far. "They let me use this sometimes, but only when he's not home. I'm not supposed to talk to anyone, but I learned things. I learned how to make this game. If you found it, you're my only chance. Please help me." I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. My hands felt clammy as I scrolled through the text, which became more fragmented and frantic. "He says we're family now. He said they were in the way. He said I belong to him." The next message was a set of coordinates. The truth hit me like a punch to the chest. The girl in the game wasn't just a fictional character. She was real, and something horrifying had happened to her. The coordinates led to a small rural town in Idaho. At first, I thought it was part of the game, but when I copied and pasted them into Google Maps, the location was real, a remote farmhouse surrounded by dense woods. The game continued, leading me to a basement in the virtual house. Inside, I found a wall of photos: a man, a woman, and 2 children smiling together. Then a single photo on the far end of the screen caught my attention. It was pixelated, but I could make out the image of a man holding the hand of a young girl. The text below read, "They told me he was my uncle. They said I could trust him." The screen glitched violently, and when it returned, the girl's face filled the screen. She was crying. The final message appeared: "I'm still here. Please don't let him take me too." I didn't know what to do at first. Was this some elaborate hoax? A fictional game meant to stir up emotions? But the coordinates were real, and the details felt too specific to ignore. I contacted the local police anonymously, giving them everything: the game, the messages, the location. I wasn't expecting much, but a week later, I saw a news report. Authorities had raided the farmhouse. They found the girl locked in a small, windowless room. She was malnourished, traumatized, but alive. She had been held there for over 5 years, forced to live under her captor's control. The man, a family member, had killed her parents and younger brother to claim her for himself, fabricating a story that they died in an accident. He had limited her access to the internet, but in her desperation, she taught herself how to use a basic game-making program to reach out to the outside world. When the police interviewed her, she revealed the chilling truth. He had monitored everything she did online, every click, every interaction, every desperate attempt to reach the outside world. Each failed attempt led to cruel and relentless punishment, a cycle of fear she couldn't escape. With no other way out, she poured everything into creating this game, using RPG Maker, hiding her story in its code. It was her final hope that someone somewhere would play it and uncover the truth before it was too late. She said one thing that stuck with me: "I knew someone would play it. I just didn't know if they'd believe me." I've deleted the game from my computer, wiped it clean like I could erase the memory. Now, every time I look at my screen, I see her, sitting in that dark room, surrounded by silence, pouring her soul into something so small, yet so desperate. A tiny spark of hope hidden in code, waiting for someone to find it. And sometimes I can't help but wonder, if I hadn't played that night, would anyone else have found her? Or would she have been lost forever? These 4 stories of indie horror games are more than just entertainment. They're warnings. Each tale leaves us with an uncomfortable question. How much of the terror in these games is fiction, and how much is rooted in truth? After all, the most horrifying games aren't the ones that make us scream. They're the ones that leave us wondering, long after the credits roll, if we've brought something real into our lives. So the next time you hear about a strange, obscure game that no one's heard of, think twice before downloading it. You might not just be playing the game might be playing you.